knew the wild riders in the vacant land were about to vanish forever. And the more I considered the subject, the bigger the forever loomed. Without knowing how to do it, I began to record some facts around me. And the more I looked, the more the panorama unfolded. Artist Frederick Remington. This is The Artful Painter, art lessons for artists, collectors, and people who love arts. Kehoe began his remarkable career as a fine art painter just a little over 8 years ago. Though he had attended the Art Institute of Boston, it would be another 30 years before he would pick up his paintbrushes again. With the loving support of his wife, he abandoned a successful career in advertising to pursue fine art painting full-time. Kevin refers to himself as a painter with a camera. However, his thoughtfully composed photos are merely a jumping-off point for his exquisite, expansive paintings that stir the heart. His goal is not to simply render a photo into a painting. Rather, Kevin seeks to express his subject matter, as he puts it, like an emotionally conjured image. His paintings are about how he wants to recall a moment in time in his mind and his heart. Struck by the epic and awe-inspiring vistas of the American West, his paintings often capture the wonder and wanderlust of the West. Kevin says of the West, in short, it's where you lose yourself to find yourself. The West is good medicine. Indeed, in this stress-filled world, Kehoe's magnificent paintings are just the right prescription and dosage we need of Western therapy. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. Kevin, we talked, about 2-3 weeks ago, and you were getting ready to go to a very special event. And I want to know what that was and how it turned out and what it was like. Let's start there.
Well, so the event was a painting that was acquired by the state of Utah, a painting that I had done as part of my second series called Western Therapy, of 12 paintings that really celebrate the West. One of them was acquired by the state of Utah in 2015 for the state's permanent collection, which, was such an honor. It was just such an extraordinary happening. Here I am. I've only been painting for 8 years, and basically 2 years in, this happens, and I'm kind of like, wait, what? Really? Anyway, that painting basically got a promotion this year because it was selected by the new First Lady, Abby Cox, and Governor Spencer Cox. They went to the state's permanent collection and chose probably 15 or 20 works that they wanted to hang in their residence in the governor's mansion. The artists whose work were selected were invited to an art reveal event at the governor's mansion, and each artist, got to speak for a couple minutes and make remarks regarding their piece. It was extraordinary. It was amazing. A couple things happened that I just didn't see coming, but I got to see where my painting is hanging, which is up as you climb the stairs to the third floor, which is where they hold a lot of their small public events. The ballroom is up there. But as you come up to the third floor, my painting basically hits you right in the face. I loved where they put it. It's against a kind of a sandstone red rock color. The wall is that color, and the painting has a lot of blue sky in it, so it really pops.
Nice.
Anyway, it was an incredible night.
What was the title of the painting?
The title of the painting is High West High.
That's incredible. Now, what floors me is you said you'd only been painting 8 years. So what a culmination. And I know it's not the end of your career. But what a milestone that you've reached there. But 8 years. 8 years.
8 years, yeah. I had a pretty intense and crazy advertising career that spanned 30 years. And I didn't pick up a brush once during that career for lots of reasons. I was all in on that career. It was very intense. I climbed the ladder and went all the way to the top. I was a chief creative officer and co-president at one point, of the biggest agency in Seattle. 200 people employed, lots of accounts, some big ones that you have to hold on to, otherwise you fold your tent. It was a wild ride, and I just didn't have time to paint. I was in survival mode, really. But anyway, that was just one piece of my career. But my career was 30 years from beginning to end until I decided to unplug and truly follow my heart and devote myself to being a full-time painter. That was in 2013 in January. And so now it's about 8.5 years. Yeah, but I hadn't picked up a brush in 30 years.
So you had picked up a brush 30 years prior, or?
Yeah, I went to art school. I went to a very small, wonderful art school that is now, it's not an independent art school anymore. It's part of Lesley College in Boston. It's the art arm of Lesley College. It was called the Art Institute of Boston. Very small school, which I loved. Very intimate classes and a lot of quality time with a body of, the faculty, the teachers were amazing. I just loved every second of it, and I thought I was ready to dive into a career in illustration. I loved scouring the Illustrator annuals, and I thought, I'm ready to do this. But the reality was I wasn't ready to do it for lots of reasons. I didn't see a good enough career path. I didn't see a clear enough way to have a steady income. And I just wasn't ready for that at that point in my life, even though I was getting work as an illustrator and I was enjoying it and it was rewarding. I just wasn't ready to make that my long haul. And I found advertising, which really intrigued me. No 2 days are alike. You're working on lots of different brands. A little bit about a lot of things. You're working with great creative thinkers, talented art directors, copywriters, designers. You're trying to win new business, which is like, the big game every time a new business pitch. It's like the Super Bowl and you're trying to win it. It was very stimulating, and there was a really great career path that I could see, and I was good at it. I'm a very conceptual person, and I loved the idea of coming in to work every day and trying to crack the big idea and then bring it to life and produce it and then see it on TV. And all of that just, to me, that was a ride worth riding. And 30 years went by.
Quickly.
Quickly. Yeah.
And so here you are.
My joke is that it probably shaved 5 years off my life, but it's a fair trade.
I get emails from listeners from time to time. I'm glad to see young people get into this. I really am, because they're opening up a door very early in their life. But the reality is that many of us get started much later, myself included. I had a career in software development. Getting started later can be intimidating because you see before you what seems to be a finite window that's not as big as a person that's in their 20s or their teens. So what prompted you to say, you know what, this successful career that I have, it's comfortable, it's financially rewarding, I'm going to jump into fine art, which is not an easy field to make a living at. What was your thought process?
Well, my thought process was this. In my heart, having loved illustration, and some of my favorite painters my truest inspirations started as illustrators, like people like Maynard Dixon and Andrew Wyeth. And, I believe I have a soft spot for Norman Rockwell as well.
Oh, yes.
A prolific painter. But to answer your question, yeah, I went to art school and some special things happened for me in art school. I'm at this tiny little art school in Boston, the Art Institute of Boston. And, the holy grail for illustrators back then was to have your work published in the Illustrators Annual, which is like the Bible for illustrators. And each year, a very small number of works get selected to be published in that annual. Well, there's also a student competition for art students. And, in my last year of art school, I had a piece selected for the New York Society of Illustrators student competition. And I was the first student in the history of the Art Institute of Boston to get a piece in that publication. It was you know what, Carl, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
I was like, my family and I went to New York for this induction ceremony where my piece was hanging. I had done a portrait painting of the golfer, Tom Watson, and it was acrylic on gesso. And, it was a nice piece. And I was inspired by guys like David Grove and Bernie Fuchs and Mark English and all these incredible illustrators whose work were often on the cover of Sports Illustrated and Time Magazine, all the big publications. And, that's where my aim was. I thought, if I work as hard as I can, maybe someday I could be on the cover of Time or I could be on the cover of Sports Illustrated. It was a huge part of me, even though I was running down this advertising path. I'll tell you, whenever we were on production in advertising, whatever city or town I was in across America or even across the globe, when we had any downtime, I would be in the galleries wherever I was, and I was just a sponge soaking up all this amazing work in every small town, big city, international place where I could get to galleries. And so for 30 years, I was a fine art sponge. I was walking out of these galleries feeling two things. Equal parts frustration because I was not painting, and just complete inspiration from the staggering work I was seeing. That was just incredible. And that went on for 30 years. So at a certain point, it just needed to be released. I needed to open this other door and run through it, but I needed to do it with a whole heart, a whole mind, not dabble. It wasn't a hobby. I really knew that I had done everything that I wanted to accomplish in advertising, I felt. The industry was changing for lots of reasons. Some of the fun was being sucked out of it. And I was a little bit over it. I was a little bit burnt out, and I had just turned 50, and I thought, I'm a pretty young spirit, but I'm also a realist. I was turning 50. As my wife said, if you don't do it now, when are you going to do it? And you can't do it when you're dead, so you better get after it. And she was my biggest champion and supporter, and really pushed me through that door and said, I'll never forget, people were like, that must have been a big decision for you to drop this lucrative career and basically one income stream. And it was a one-sentence conversation with my wife when I said, I really have done some soul searching. I've really looked deep inside my heart, and I think it's time for me to paint. And she said this, go attack it the way I know you will, and you'll be great.
Oh, man.
And it was over. And that was it. That was the entire conversation.
But she must have known something about you to know that you would have success with that, because I know realistically most people don't have that experience because there's so much insecurity associated with making a living, supporting a family, keeping the mortgage going. That's understandable, but she must have had some inkling that, you know what, you're probably going to do okay with this.
She knows me better than anyone, and she knows how I'm wired. She knows what's in my circuit box, and she knows that if I really was telling her that I really needed to do this, that I would really get after it. And so that was it. But did all those other things come with it, like the insecurities and the terror and a massive life work change? And oh man, did it ever come with it? I felt all of it. I felt all of it, even though she was this beautiful wind at my back. I felt all of it, and I had to work through it. And, you know, I tell people that I had to kind of learn to put the fear aside because I was aiming very high, and I know how high the standards are in the galleries and in the publications and in the museums. And I know exactly who's doing what and how good they are. And that's where I was aiming. And I mean, that, you know, it can scare the bejesus out of you. But I learned to, instead of fearing all of that, I have another way of saying, what I did was I just began to trust the journey. I had implicit trust in the journey. And I thought, here's the one thing, if this is the only thing I can control, how much I put into it, how hard I work, how, you know, I think one of the most beautiful human qualities is grit. I think
True grit, yes.
I think grit is really what, you know, is just a beautiful human quality. Not everyone has it, but I just thought if I show some true grit, then I can trust the rest. I see this like windy road, the long and winding road. And to me, the most fun part of the winding road is not being able to see around every twist and turn, but trusting that if you give it your all every day, you leave it all in the field, and you when your head hits the pillow, you fall asleep because you've given it your all, then good things will happen if you trust the journey. And man, have good things happened. And it's just made me trust the journey even more on an even deeper level.
I like that. It kind of reminds me of all those backcountry roads in Utah. You don't know where it's going, but you know that there's some kind of vista awaiting you as you take those curves as you go around. That's a beautiful image you painted there.
It's true. And, you know, the things that have unfolded are things that I would have never, Carl, in a million years, dared to think of or predict or think would be these beautiful realities. I'm 8.5 years in, and I don't say this in a boastful way. I say this in a prideful way. I'm very, very proud of the things that have happened. I'm in the permanent collection of the Booth Western Art Museum. I mean, come on. I still can't believe it.
Okay, I got to stop you right there, because that's exactly where I learned about you, was at the Booth Museum, because there's a beautiful painting. It's about, I don't know, it looks like it's, 48, 50 inches wide. And
it is.
Oh, well, I walked in, and of course there's many fine paintings at the booth, especially in the contemporary area where your painting hangs.
Yeah.
But man, that one just, it arrested me. And I said, okay, I like the way this guy is thinking. And I took a picture of it. I found it this morning. I said, I know I took a picture of that painting because it spoke to me. I loved it. It's called
Western Book Club.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's one of 12 pieces that of a series. Again, this is the advertising showing up in my painting career. I work basically in campaigns. The way I choose to come at painting which is really important to me, is I put my finger on a truth that inspires me. in this case, it's a celebration and an adoration for the West and what the West does for the human soul, how it feeds the soul and inspires the heart and gives you perspective. And when you're out in these amazing places, all these good things happen, whether you realize them or not. And I wanted to devote how those feelings, those truths, I wanted to express those in a contemporary way. You know, I know we can get on a horse and ride a horse in the West and feel like we're back, you know.
We're in a Zane Grey Western novel, yeah.
Exactly, but there's a lot of beautiful ways that we now use the West that are more current. I wanted to express those ways. And so I began that series of Western therapy paintings, and Western Book Club was one of those ways where it's a woman, and it's my wife, Julie, and our black lab ranger, and they're just sitting up in the high Uintas in a meadow. She's in a little camping folding chair in front of kind of a 1970s camping trailer, which has a lot of charm and aesthetic beauty. And they're just sitting there, the two of them. She's got her coffee cup and her big thick book, her novel. And there's no iPhone and there's no laptop. It's just her and her book and our dog. And that's Western therapy.
Well, see, I think that's one of the reasons why this painting spoke to me was my wife and I and my children have camped in a place just like that. You know, you relate what you see with experiences that you personally have. And it may not be your experience per se, but it sure did elicit that emotional response in me. I said, oh, I love those days when we did just that. The mountains were our backdoor neighbors, you know? Yeah.
And then there's a little bit of subtext in that painting. I don't know if you'll have to go back and look at what I'm about to tell you, and this is real. That meadow was straddling two mountainsides. One of them, it looks like there had been a fire and everything had been charred and is regrowing back, but it's still pretty barren and pretty charred. And the other side is this old growth pine forest, these pine trees. And I just remember that stark difference between the left side and the right side. And I thought that's a really poignant background because, you know, it's kind of like you're leaving, you're a little burnt out because of the pressures of daily life and the stress. And you get up there and you get to decompress. And then by the time you leave, you're feeling more like the beautiful, healthy pine trees on the right. And I put this trailer right between the two. And it became a very interesting backdrop for that painting. And in the sky, the clouds are kind of forming this almost angelic formation where it's like this human figure with open arms kind of welcoming
exactly
cloud. Yeah. So there's a lot of subtext in that painting that I don't get to talk about too often.
I can't wait until I go back to the booth and see it again. And now I'll have that context that you just shared in mind. So
yeah.
In the series, or at what point in the series of Western therapy was this particular painting?
Western Book Club was, I think, right in the middle, either number 5 or 6. Yeah, and I just thought again, this is the advertising showing up where I really think hard and long about conceptually what I'm doing. I agonize over the titles, but I thought a book club made up of only one person and a dog is the right kind of book club for Western therapy. So I think it was right about in the middle when I did that one.
Nice.
Yeah.
So the first time I heard that expression, Western therapy, in this series. Now, this is what I thought. I'm not saying that it matches what your intentions were, but this is the impression that it made. Okay. So many times I would go out west, and I would find it therapeutic just to be out in the big open spaces, the wide open spaces, the beautiful scenery. And that's not to put down Georgia or any place else, which is where I live. But it is different. There is no place like it. And I have traveled all over the world. And there's just nothing like the American West. And so I thought when I saw that expression, Western therapy, I said, yes, that is it. When did you come up with the concept Western therapy? Was that before you started painting it, or did it evolve as you did the paintings?
Oh, great question. So, when I had this itch, just as a human, to somehow, some way, go west, young man.
Yes.
I didn't even understand why this was an internal calling, but it was. And I knew that I had to answer it. I didn't even completely understand it, but I knew I had to get out west. So I had a job offer from a small creative agency in Salt Lake City. They recruited, or a recruiter called me on behalf of them. And the more I learned about this little agency and how creative they were, and they were doing some great work, I thought, this is the door. This is the door to the West opening for me. I took the job and I got out west, and in the little free time I had, I would, get to, a couple of the national parks and places like Moab and Canyonlands. And I just remember the first trip down there, the first camping trip, under the stars, and then waking up in these beautiful Red Rock canyons, and then being on like the West Rim Trail there of Canyonlands, and standing on the edge of like a 1,500-foot straight drop and seeing as far as you can see. And in a landscape, unlike any landscape I had ever seen, I felt like I was on Mars. And I just remember thinking, this is, I mean, I couldn't believe it. It was like surreal and too good to be true, and a whole bunch of other things all at the same time. And I remember thinking, I'm going to spend a good chunk of my life in the West. I know it right here and right now.
Had you ever been to the West before? You got that job?
Only a family vacation to California, to the beach, which was different. This was like the high West, and this was Red Rock country, and the mountains in Utah. And I love to ski, and I just love nature and wildlife and hiking. And I just thought, this is the Holy Grail. And I still feel that way, only times 100. And so that first feeling of like, oh my God, this is affecting me in all kinds of profound ways. I came up with the term Western therapy much later. But again, that's the advertising speaking. That's a nice little handle to encapsulate and kind of crystallize all of these other feelings and thoughts and emotions that I have for the American West. So Western therapy became, my first series. Well, I had done Chelsea Light as my very first series out of the gates. That was to really demonstrate how I could handle light and spaces and textures and color. But then when I wanted to do landscapes, it was Western therapy, and it became 12 paintings. And, in my mind, I'm still doing Western therapy. I plan very much to continue this series. It's really for whatever recognition or credibility I do have, I'm really kind of known for Western therapy because, that's the series that opened. It was one half of the inaugural exhibit that I was invited to open the Southern Utah Museum of Art, this gorgeous brand new museum in Cedar City, Utah. And I was juxtaposed with one of my heroes, Jimmy Jones, landscape painter, one of Utah's most accomplished painters. He's no longer with us, but here my paintings are juxtaposed with his, and we're opening a museum. I mean, talk about—
That's incredible. That's incredible. Yeah.
Tell me about it. Yeah. And so that's what Western therapy led. It led to my first solo show at Modern West in Salt Lake City. A big thank you to Diane Stewart, the owner of Modern West Fine Art, and one of the most amazing art collectors and art patrons and champions of art that there is on this earth.
That's high praise, yeah.
Western therapy was and that's why, I'm so proud that one piece was chosen by the governor and his wife to hang in the governor's mansion. So, Carl, the best way for me to really, really tell you about how I feel about Western therapy is to allow me to just read a short paragraph that is my artist statement about what Western therapy means to me.
By all means, please do it.
Yeah, this really hits it hard and expresses what it means to me. So, Western therapy, here's what it is to me. We all need to be reminded that the big picture is indeed big. Feeling significantly insignificant is the West's wise way of renewing our sense of wow and wonder, while simultaneously resizing life's trials and tribulations. The high West is where high altitude air enters the lungs and exits as clear thinking. Perspective is gained and priorities are reset. It's where wonder and wanderlust were born. The majesty of the West ignites the imagination. It's where blue sky thinking runs free and dreams rehearse for reality. In short, it's where you lose yourself to find yourself. The wide open West is open wide to possibility. It feeds the soul and inspires the heart like no other. Reserve a space for awe in your psyche, and the West will fill it. Each time I immerse myself in the spiritual spaces of the West, they stir my soul, spark my imagination, and reconfirm my love affair with the wildly beautiful relationship between landscape and light, person and place. Simply put, the West is good medicine for the human who chooses to revel in it, be fulfilled by it, and just plain feel alive in it. There are countless ways to get the West in your blood and be better off for it. These paintings I call Western therapy celebrate some of those ways.
Amen. That's it.
That's what it means to me.
That's beautiful. And I love that expression that you used in there is the wonder and the wanderlust, because I don't know how to describe it. I do remember when I first had an inkling of it, my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Cranford, she came to my house. Now that's something no teacher had ever done before. We were a very, very poor family. And she shows up in this little shack that we all lived in. It wasn't a shack, but it was a modest little home.
Yeah.
And she brought some gifts to me. She says she brought a piece of petrified wood from the petrified forest. Not from the national park itself, because she told me you can't do that. But this was a souvenir that she had purchased right outside the park. And she told me about her travels out west. And up until that point, I had never, ever thought of it. I didn't know that was possible, to even think beyond the borders of the state of Georgia. Okay?
Right.
And that was it. After that, I couldn't get it out of my mind. And I still can't. Even in my 60s, I can't get it out of my mind. So that's why your words really reverberate with me So I'm sorry I've talked so much, not let you speak here. But it really is an emotional response to what you're having to say.
Yeah, well, we all have that thing that kind of opened our eyes to a different place and different spaces that are life-changing.
Yes. Well, what's the criteria for a painting that you do to be in that series, Western Therapy? I mean, there's all kinds of landscape paintings and that can be considered Western, but
right.
What's the criteria for it to be in this series that you're doing?
Well, as an ex-advertising guy, I'm really a storyteller. And to me, the power in these landscapes out here is when the human element is in the context of the landscape, of the space, of the light. And it's when that human element enters the equation, that's when there's a real story and a real power. So the power is the person and place, the landscape and light. So in each one of these paintings, there's a human element immersed in the West in a different way, enjoying the West, being in the West, being changed by the West. And that was the criteria, was to go out on the road. And I didn't know exactly what was going to happen because I'm very much of the mind as a painter to not force things, but to go out into the world and allow things to, I like to use the word, be struck. Struck is a great word. I allow that to happen. I allow things to come to me. I allow myself to, if I'm, to use the words of John Register, one of my true painting inspirations, to be a persistent observer. I mean, to not just go out and drive around and be like, la, 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 but to really observe and really see. And that is what I do when I go out. And I trusted that if I went out and spent enough time in these magical, majestic places of the West, that I would see things and things would happen that would inspire me, and they did. And they did. The very first painting in the series, just to tell you a quick story to kind of color this in, I'm in one of the most beautiful areas of Utah, maybe my most favorite, Escalante, Grand Staircase. The reason I love it so much is because the rock in that area of the state, it isn't just red, but it actually goes to pink and white. And out of the pink and white rock are these lush old growth trees and vegetation. So the colors, the pink, the red, the white, the green, the orange kind of sandstone sand, and then against a blue sky and some cloud action, it's really sensory overload, Carl. It's like, wow. So I'm down there standing purposely. Scenic Byway 12 was rated by the travel book Fedors. They make all the travel books. It was rated the most scenic byway in the world, number one.
I agree totally with their assessment. My wife and I have done that very route, and oh,
incredible.
Man.
Yeah. So I'm there about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, standing in the middle of Byway 12. I'm literally looking down at the yellow stripes right underneath me.
It may be 2 hours before another car comes.
Yeah, well, and it's a narrow road. It's not wide. And I can see this dot off in the distance, and it's a motorcycle. And he's probably 2 miles away because I have this incredible view. And I'm standing on this ridge. So it kind of dips below. So I knew that as soon as he got up to me and appeared over this ridge in the road, that I was going to shoot pictures of him. Now, the problem with that idea is that he didn't know I was there. Yeah. And he's going like 100.
Oh,
anyway, yeah, so he comes up over this ridge. I'll never forget it, Carl. And this is really the birth of a series of paintings. He comes up over the ridge, and I'm standing lens locked on him. And he's going, I'm not kidding, like 90 miles an hour. And he gets up there, and there's this 2-second period where he sees me, I see him, he knows exactly what I'm doing. He's calm as a cucumber and just ever so casually flips me the peace sign. This is totally unscripted, and I shoot it, and I'm thinking, please God, if ever I got a shot in tack sharp focus, let it be this shot. And so I turn around and he's already now a dot. He's like, woo, and now he's a dot the other way. And I run over to the side of the road and I look at my image and it's tack sharp. And I'm like,
got
thank
it.
you.
Nailed
Thank you. Thank you. Because he was moving so fast. I wasn't sure if I got it. And I thought if this shot is in focus, that is the first painting in the series, because that just happened. It was unscripted. It was authentic. And I know he was getting his Western therapy, and he knew that I was getting mine in a different way. And that was the first painting. And that's now in my personal collection. I'm never selling it. Even though I've had multiple people ask me if I would part with it, I won't.
Well, maybe one day that motorcyclist will make the connection between you and that painting. Wouldn't that be
wouldn't
something?
That be great? Wouldn't that be great?
Oh, I think that'd be wonderful. Of course,
but this is kind of how I went out and just trusted that things would happen.
So do you travel by yourself when you do that, or do you have your family with you, or?
No, it's mostly by myself, because for anyone else, it would be a form of torture.
I wasn't going to say that, but yeah, that's what I do too. I say, honey, I'm going to go out for a day trip, and she knows what I'm going to do. And I've done that out west as well. I just get in a car and just drive, see what I can find.
Now we've done things like we'll go to a destination and we'll stay at a nice place, and they'll be there, but I'll disappear for 2 days. But I wouldn't do it to them, because I'm a very, very, very patient person, Carl, and I will sit on the side of the road for hours and wait for the right light, the right clouds, the right vehicle to come by.
Is he all right? Is he okay?
No, I've had people stop and say, "Dude, you all right? Do you need help?" I'm like, I couldn't be better.
That's wonderful.
That's how it happens. That's how it happens. And each painting really in that series has its own story of discovery and kind of authenticity of things that really happened.
When you go out on these little expeditions of discovery to be struck by something that will inspire you to paint, do you ever do plein air painting, outdoor painting, or are you more capturing the idea with photographs, sketching? I'm curious about your process.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I went out many years ago and bought and I agonized over every little thing that I was getting my whole plein air setup, and I got it all, and it's all ready to go, and I haven't gone yet. And I will get out there and have every intention of plein air painting, because to me, I would love to cross-pollinate the painting from life and being more spontaneous, and these really labor-intensive studio pieces that take, on average, 100 to 125 hours of painting time. That doesn't even include the time of me going out on the road, discovering, shooting separate elements, making a composition. That's just like once I get the drawing figured out and on the canvas or on the board, whatever it may be, and then painting, it's about 100 to 125 hours, and some are much more. So to me, I would love to get out and do the 1-day painting or 2-day painting and cross-pollinate that energy.
Or 1 hour or 2 hour painting.
It could be,
Yeah.
yes. So the answer is, in my heart, I'm a plein air painter, but in real life experience, not yet. So
Well, that journey will come.
it will. It'll happen.
Yeah. I've talked to many artists and some of my instructors, they really stress the value of doing it. It's not always easy to do, though, especially as we get older. It's just harder to do. And the schedule, life, the pandemic, and other things just make it difficult sometimes. So how do you collect your ideas then? If you're not plein air painting, outdoor painting, what do you do?
So this is, again, the advertising showing up, but during my career, I was so fortunate to work with some of the most amazing, accomplished, recognized photographers there are in the US and in some cases in the world. And I learned so much from them, from how they approach getting a shot, everything about how they're hardwired emotionally, their patience, their determination. But shooting is a very large part of my painting process. There's a lot of connective tissue there. It used to be a conundrum. I'm a pure painter, and I wouldn't want to also say I'm a photographer. I just wouldn't want to go there. I was very guarded about it and cautious about crossing wires and letting people know that I do both. But the truth is, I love shooting. I feel like I find a lot of my inspiration and light and composition through the lens from my times working with these incredible shooters. In fact, I don't even, out of respect to who I've worked with, I don't even like to call myself a photographer. I call myself a painter with a camera, which I think there is an important distinction to that, because I'm looking for paintings. I really am. I'm looking at the light, the composition. I'm framing things up. I'm moving fluidly, like when I shoot horses, shoot pictures of horses. I have to move with them. I'm not really ever on a tripod. I use the camera very differently. It's really for my paintings. And I will figure out.
Are you shooting primarily like with an iPhone, or are you using a DSLR kit?
No, I have a beautiful Leica Velux.
Yeah.
I have a Velux, which is the perfect camera for me because of a fixed lens of 25 to 400, which is this great range for me to shoot in nature, and lightning fast sensor. So focal lengths change in just a nanosecond. It's a great camera for any painter that can't be out there and trying to change lenses, because sometimes, like with horses, things are happening and they're not going to wait for me to change a lens. So it's the perfect camera for me, but that's what I shoot with. And I've by default ended up with this collection of images called I call them Simple Beauty. They're limited edition prints. I do them as giclée prints on beautiful archival watercolor paper. And I'm at the point now where my Simple Beauty photography is about to be represented by a top-tier gallery. It's too early to say which one and where, but I'm going to have an opening in the fall for my photography, and interior designers and art lovers are coming to me for my Simple Beauty prints. I actually have a separate website for that, and
What's the website? Let's go ahead and share it.
Well, the website is my name, Kevin Kehoe simplebeauty.com. So Kevin Kehoe simplebeauty.com. And so over the last 8 or 9 years when I've been out shooting, if I shoot Carl 200 images, there's maybe one that is calling to be a painting. It's very rare that I feel that way about an image where it's worthy, where the inspiration, the light, the composition, it all lined up and is worthy of becoming a painting. I'm very, very critical about what is worthy. But by default, I've ended up with these beautiful images that don't want to be paintings or live as paintings. They want to be photographs. And so that's how that happened. It was never my strategy to do both and be making a living with both, but that's what's happened. I've even been invited to have like these amazing, I don't know if you have them in your area, where they do these showcase of homes in the late summer and fall, where you go in these new homes and get to tour them. I've been invited by builders and interior designers to have these like multi-million-dollar homes as my personal gallery. And I've done 2 of them. And in the last 2 years, I've had the whole home with my 90% of my framed prints in there, photographs, and sprinkle in a few paintings, but the entire body of work has sold each time with the home. Which I never in a million. I thought if I get to sell 1 or 2 prints, that'll be so.
And those are photographic prints. You're not talking about paintings. You're talking about photographs.
But I think if you go on my site and look at my photography work, my photographs feel more like paintings. They're not. You can see the connective tissue. I try to shoot paintings. They're less photographic and there's more of a soft, almost illustrated quality to the images and the way I love when the cloud layer is sitting on the valley floor here in the Heber Valley, because everything becomes a giant softbox. Beautiful, soft, diffused light behind my subject matter, whether it's a horse or a barn or an old tractor. There's this giant softbox back there. I'm not trying to shoot blue sky and clouds and really sharply focused things. I'm kind of making paintings with the camera.
I think that's an interesting thought. My background too was photography first, and then painting, and so I find a lot of there's a lot of things that you learn in photography that you can use in painting, and vice versa. I used to have a podcast called The Artful Camera, and I actually did a number of episodes where we talked about what you could do, what photographers can learn from the old masters. And I had intended to do a series on what can painters learn from photographers, because there's so much that's interchangeable between the two mediums. It's how I kind of, my experience in advertising, I got to work with these just tremendous shooters, and it naturally came out that way for me as part of my process. I'm very open now about how they're connected, because I work very hard at my compositions, and whether that means shooting a separate road or separate clouds or separate vegetation or just separate elements, and then composing my things in the studio. And so I'm doing that more and more now. On the painting side, what it's given me is, if I see a long shadow from a tree or from a person walking down a trail, what's showing up in my paintings more and more is me taking creative license and being more impressionistic with some of these signals that I'm getting from the image, and hitting a shadow with more color than it really has. Or maybe just taking liberties and letting me, Kevin Kehoe, the painter, come out and show up in a more impressionistic way, even though I have a photograph as a guideline. It's only a guideline to me. It's not to be a slave to the photograph or to be too literal to the photograph. I'm really letting more of me just come out and handle things the way I want to handle them as a painter. Yes, exactly. You're not just rendering a photograph at all. I know And I don't mean this in a bad way, but some people might look at your paintings and say, wow, that's photorealistic. And I wouldn't characterize it as photorealistic because I've actually seen one of your paintings up close, and that's not it at all. There is a painterly element to your paintings, the way you interpret
thank
that.
you. And people say that to me all the time. A lot of times, people that are more uninformed about art will say, oh, it looks like a photograph. And that's their way of complimenting you. And
Yes,
saying,
it is.
It looks so real. Well, there's not one bone in this body that has any aspiration to be what I would call a technical painter or a photorealist. I would quit painting today if that was my goal. I have no interest because those people are talented and they are very technical, but I'm trying to have some of my soul end up on the canvas and some of my individual quality as a human and as an artist. Like this painting behind me that I'm working on, a good example is the foreground is this kind of shortcut grassy field that's turned gold from the sun. Now, I had no interest in painting every blade of grass, but what I was interested in is the kind of horizontal stripes and differences in color that I noticed and observed in that field. And so in a very kind of more contemporary and impressionistic way, that's how I chose to handle painting the foreground in that piece. I didn't want there to be too much visual busyness or noise distracting from this horse who is in that stride, and it's that nanosecond where all four hooves leave the ground just for a split second. And I love that. And that's really what that horse and that central subject matter is all about. So I wanted to simplify the foreground, but still make it beautiful and compelling. And that's kind of me as a painter taking cues and signals from the photograph, but not in any way being literal to it.
And that is a beautiful painting. And that's the other thing about your paintings. If you go to your website, I encourage everyone to do that. You're not limited to just Western therapy topics where it's the human elements. There's the horse series is quite beautiful. Some of your paintings which depict light in hallways and other what we might call a mundane location becomes angelic. It's because the light becomes the subject there. So you have quite a diverse palette of an imagination when it comes to painting.
You're right. It's not just about the West. I allow myself to be struck. I like to call it, I have a love for authenticity in places, beings, and things.
Well, what does that mean, authenticity in places, beings, and things?
Well, I really spark to and am struck by things in the world, places in the world, beings in the world that have a story to tell and kind of reek of authenticity and have a soulfulness. That's really what inspires me. Now, whether that be a small kind of dive liquor store on a corner in Holbrook, Arizona, along an amazing stretch of Route 66, or whether that be a horse that I meet down a dirt road who's running in a field, or whether that be these beautiful majestic Western spaces, landscapes, or whether it be an illuminated, I have a whole series of illuminated structures. The liquor store is one of them. And I have the horse series, and I have the Western therapy series, and I have the Chelsea Light series, which are these interior spaces in these post-war gallery district buildings in New York, where there's 20 coats of paint on the brick, and the glass in the windows is vintage glass and kind of imperfectly perfect. And the light pours in, and these stairwells and hallways, if those walls could talk, I mean, man, they're really, they have a story to tell. They're authentic in that way. They're genuine in that way. There's a soulfulness. There's a reverence. So that's what I allow myself to be struck by. And the best way for me to say it is I know it when I see it, and I know it even more when I feel it. And that's why I've ended up with these 4 different series, lots of subject matter. That's me as still, I think, a new painter running through doors, trying to figure out who I am and where I belong. But I also think it's made me a better artist. I've learned to handle lots of different subject matter from a drawing standpoint. It's made me become a better drawer than if I had just done one thing. So I'm very proud of my kind of spectrum of subject matter. And it also lets me work on this series. And then, when I'm a little like crispy from that series, I get to move over to this other series and expand that one. So it keeps things fresh and interesting for me as an artist.
Yeah, I think we as humans, we're project oriented. So I like to work on a project, but then I like to move to something that may be totally different than what I was working on before.
It's true. And, there might be a gallery that loves my structural pieces or my nocturnes of illuminated structures, and they want more and more of those. But as a new painter, I didn't want to get pegged I just didn't want to do one thing for the rest of my life. And, call it rebellious, call it whatever you want, but it's me saying, no, wait a minute. I'm going to paint some horses and they're going to be beautiful. And I'm going to paint the anatomy of a horse, which is not easy, but when you get it right, just the power and the elegance of the muscles and the proportions and the structure of a horse in different positions, that's a very challenging thing to do after you've been doing, liquor stores and bungalows with Christmas lights on them. But it's made me a better artist. So that's just me being a work in progress.
That reminds me of Frederick Remington. Said he knew a horse, but he didn't always want to paint a horse. He wanted to, Impressionism was making its mark in the United States at that time, and he wanted to do more impressionistic paintings. And here he had been an illustrator for all these years. So he too did not want to be pigeonholed. He wanted to be able to do something different.
He's on my short list of my truest inspirations.
Let's talk about your inspirations.
Well, my truest painting inspirations, both the masters so contemporary artists who I love their work and am really influenced by, and then the list of deceased artists. Those 2 lists I have 12 names on each list is 12 names long. And the reason I keep it to 12 is because I don't want to overwhelm myself with loving too many artists, because then I don't know what to do with all that. It's overwhelming. So the names on my lists are very purposeful. There are things about their work that inspire me and inform me so much that I try to pull threads from all of those 24 names and knit my own sweater. So I'm not trying to be them or be like them, but there's something about their work, a quality, whether it be the colors they use, their palette, their composition, their brushwork, the way they handle light. And I'll pull these threads and kind of knit my own sweater and hope that what comes out the other end is truly me, but with a healthy respect and admiration for their work. And so I'm very kind of disciplined about whose names are on that list and whose aren't, and why.
But 24 people, that's still a lot to think about. So right now, at this time, who would you say are the top three that you're thinking about or studying?
Oh, well, a lot of people look at my illuminated structures and they say, oh, you must love Edward Hopper. And they're right. I do love Edward Hopper. So I love so many things about Hopper. Others have seen in my Western therapy work, and especially a painting like High West High. I just had someone say this to me the other day. Two people I met outside of Gallery Mara on Main Street in Park City, we got into a conversation, and I ended up showing them some work. And the first thing this woman said about High West High was, I see Georgia O'Keeffe in there. And
Interesting.
I was like, oh my God, you just made my day, because my thing about Georgia O'Keeffe is she could, in my mind, she wouldn't paint a straight line if you asked her to. Everything had a sensual, beautiful, organic, soft curve to it. And I love that. That's the one thing about, and her colors, I love about Georgia O'Keeffe that I think sometimes shows up in some of my horse work and in the line work. Now, it might not be literal to the horse's anatomy, but it's not abstract either, but it's somewhere in the middle. I'll see a place and a reason to make a curve with a muscle is just a little bit more me showing up than what is anatomically correct, but it pleases me more. So that's the thread that I would draw from Georgia O'Keeffe. I mean, these names on my lists are names that they have to be artists I can't live without. Plain and simple. They're so profoundly inspirational to me. I can't live without their name. Their name has to be on the list. So Hopper, John Singer Sargent, Andrew Wyeth, Winslow Homer, John Register, Georgia O'Keeffe, Johann Vermeer, Vincent van Gogh, Maynard Dixon, Frederic Remington, Ramon Casas.
I'm curious about the contemporary artists.
So I just got to meet this man at the governor's art reveal because he had a painting in the show. And it was such a kick for me to meet him, but I got to meet G. Russell Case, who I think is the most prolific watercolorist in America is Dean Mitchell, Jeremy Lipking, incredible work, Glenn Dean, Kim Kogan, Eric Bowman, painter from New York, Dan Witz, Alexander Maxwell Hajij, I think I always say his name wrong, Brett Allen Johnson, whose work I love, is a Utah painter, and I think is just incredible. David Dibble, a painter who's not well known, but David Imlay, Imlay, and Francis DeFranzo. Yeah, that's the list right now. And, sometimes a couple names come off that one because a couple need to go on. But that's why I do it that way, so that it keeps me kind of in this disciplined zone where I'm specifically seeing things and feeling things that I think if they get passed through my own personal lens, they will help me evolve and stretch as a painter and hopefully reach my full potential someday.
That's the Kevin Kehoe filter.
Yes. I think it's probably the single hardest thing for an artist to figure out is who they are.
It is. And sometimes,
I mean, on a deep level.
But see, so here's the thing, though. Your story is remarkable because you started about 8 years ago. You hadn't picked up a brush in 30 years.
No,
so you
not
pick
at
up
all.
a brush. So how do you get that? How did you accelerate the skill process so that you create these beautiful gallery, museum-worthy paintings? How did you accelerate that? And that had to be a fast process because the painting that's in the booth, I think, showed up I don't know, 2016, 2017, somewhere there. It was in.
And I started in January of 2013. So the first thing I did was I found a studio, which I was very fortunate to find, that has amazing southerly light pouring in through these big industrial windows.
So that's where you are right now. That's the same studio?
Yes, this is my studio, and this is the old firehouse building in Heber, Utah. The building's
Neat.
about 80 years old, and this upstairs section of the building is where the firemen slept in their bunks.
Does it still have the slide pole?
The eye doctor downstairs, the optometrist, still has the slide pole in his office.
Get out.
Yeah, the bottom section is still down there.
So you found this beautiful studio space.
Yeah, and I'm buying all my supplies and figuring out what paints I want to use. Again, this is a complete mystery to me. Like, which brand is for me?
Yeah.
I got to figure that out. That's going to take weeks. I'm ordering all these different brands and doing little experiments with them and trying to feel the viscosity and what oil medium am I going to use? That's another complete mystery. The possibilities are endless. I just start trying stuff and I'm like, you know what? It will reveal itself. Something will speak to you for some reason and you'll feel it. And I just trust that. So that's what I do. But I'm trying to figure all these things out at the same time, still having not done a single painting.
So what did you do?
Footage.
I mean, were they just a bunch of little paintings or sketchbooks or what?
Color studies just to feel paints and brushes and oil mediums and combinations thereof. You got to start somewhere. So pick one. And if it doesn't work, what's the worst that can happen? You change. Big deal. So I'm just trying to be kind of okay with all that, even though I'm like agonizing over it at the same time. Yeah. Then I get all my furniture and I get basically, this is probably 2 months worth of like getting the studio perfect. And what it really was, Carl, was me procrastinating because I was terrified to start a painting. Terrified.
The truth is out.
No, that's what it was. It was like the more things I find that I need to go get, the more I can put this off because I'm terrified.
Well, how did you break out of that though?
So I just, you know what? It got to a point where there's not another thing I need and it's time to paint. And it's like gulp. So I swallowed hard and I thought, okay, come at this in a smart way. Don't overwhelm yourself. Do something small and manageable and do something meaningful so that you are aiming high and you have to come out the other end. So I had missed a dear friend's wedding in Seattle, and it always bothered me that I missed this wedding. I just couldn't get there. I thought, you know what? Okay, I'm going to paint something that's going to be a wedding present for this woman, and her husband. And so I never do this. I shoot all my own reference. I never would steal a stitch of reference or another photographer's work for any reason. I'm a stickler about that. But in my first painting, there was no other way for me to get a picture of her dog. And I thought, I'm going to paint a picture of this little Jack Russell Terrier named Axel. And that is going to be Megan and Aaron's wedding present. And it's going to be my very first painting. It was 8 by 8 square, a little ampersand gesso on board. And I took that photo from Facebook and I got after it. I started drawing and I just spent like 2 or 3 days getting Axel's spirit right. Once I was satisfied with that drawing, I'm still like figuring out how I knew that I had a lot in the tank. The problem was I didn't know where I was. I didn't know how much rust was on. I didn't know how much rust had to come off. From drawing to figuring out a painting process. What kind of underpainting am I going to do? How developed is it going to be? How am I even going to treat these washes? The value structure? I'm just kind of figuring it out as I go. And
did you take a workshop or watch DVDs or read books?
No.
What did you do?
The only thing I did before we moved from New York back to Utah, my wife had a great job opportunity out here, and we needed to leave the East Coast. We had been back there for 5 years as a little bit of a short stay, and I was never happy back there. I just couldn't wait to get back out west. But before I left New York, I enrolled and took a painting class at the New York Academy of Art, which is a terrific painting school in Chelsea, Tribeca. And so each Saturday, I would drive into the city and I would attend this 8-hour all-day painting course. Great instructors. There were only, 6 or 7 students, including me, in the whole class. So we got a lot of like really in-depth side-by-side time with the teacher. And I did that for months. And that was my way of figuring out, where am I on lots of levels. So that really kind of got the rust off. So when we moved to Utah and I set up the studio and started going, I wasn't starting from like zero. I had been in the class, and the instructor said a lot of really nice things to me over the course of my work and what I was showing. And he really gave me a lot of confidence. So
That's great.
It was great. And my only regret is that we needed to leave New York to be in Utah. And I had to leave the class earlier than I would have liked. I would have liked to stay for the full course, and I wasn't able to. But it got me jump started. Those were the jumper cables. So because of the things that he said to me, a couple times he walked over to my paintings and he's like, "You haven't painted in 30 years?" And I was like, I swear on a Bible. And he said, "Well, you need to be doing this full time." That just made me feel so good. I'm hard on myself, and I wasn't thinking I was doing anything that special, but he made me feel differently, which helped me a lot, and I'll always be grateful to him for that. So that's how I started. So I did that little painting of Axel, and I sent it to them, and unannounced, they had no idea.
How did they react?
They were bawling.
Oh,
They were crying.
Wonderful.
So that was my first painting. And then I did 2 more in the context of keep shaking the rust off and just keep painting, because I needed to figure out, like, basically, how do I want to start painting? How stylistically? How thin? How thick? Is it both? I knew nothing. I just knew that I was basically going back to 30 years ago in art school and this one painting class that I had taken. So I just started trying to figure myself out. And my first series was Chelsea Light, this study of the New York hallways and common areas in the post-war gallery district buildings. And I thought, that's a really good way for me to show how I can handle light, how I can handle drawing a space, getting textures and colors and forms right. And I thought it was an interesting subject matter. I didn't know if anyone had ever done the spaces between the galleries. So that's where I started. And I did 8 of those and they all sold. Or
Whoa.
7 of them, and they all sold.
It wasn't exactly an easy subject to paint either.
No, it wasn't. But don't make no mistake about it. It was terrifying. It was terrifying. Because I left my career in the name of doing this full time and giving my all to it, fully devoted. So to me, failure was not an option. I mean, that was not an option.
I love hearing you say that, because I often hear the phrase embrace failure. And I'm more of the Chris Kraft of NASA Mission Control, where his phrase was that failure is not an option, because it forces you to think in a very disciplined way. I'm not saying a little mistake. I mean, those are certainly part of the learning process, but man, you don't want to make a mistake on this. And so you think it through, right?
Yes. And Carl, I can't believe I'm maybe ending with this, because it's maybe where I should have started by answering one of your great questions. But I really think that advertising proved years later to be the ultimate boot camp for me to become a disciplined painter. My advertising background of 30 years serves me in just immeasurable ways every day. And I came into this studio, even though I didn't know who I was as a painter or what I was going to do. I came into this studio with so much discipline and so much just moxie because of my what I learned in advertising. I approach my painting strategically. I have the work ethic from pulling all the, burning the midnight oil and working weekends and just insane hours and demands and under crazy pressure. I work in series like advertising campaigns. I know all about presentation and storytelling and how to write and how to create a brand for myself. And my time with the photographers that I worked with and as an art director and creative director, of learning from some of the greatest designers about composition and color, I brought so much into this studio that my advertising career really was this unbelievable boot camp to prepare me for this, which I never knew at the time while I was in advertising.
I think that's a good way to put it. It was a boot camp. And it does show in your work because art direction, advertising, illustration, you would have had to have an eye or develop an eye for composition and how to do the storytelling. And so yeah, that's great that you were able to build on that. And like you said, so many of the other artists that have come, many that I've talked to had a background in illustration, and they benefited from that greatly.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. I have a saying that I love. I eventually will need to make a T-shirt that just says "Make your own luck."
Yeah.
And I believe in that. Make your own luck. I just thought if I give it my all, the one thing I can control is how hard I work and how much I put into it. There's a lot of other things I can't control, whether galleries will like my work or not, or collectors, or just people in general. Some of the things that we've talked about in this conversation that have happened for me, that's trusting in the journey. I can't make those things happen. I can just work as hard as I can and be disciplined about the work that I'm doing. I was never interested in doing one-off paintings, like just being all over the place. I had a real plan for what I was painting and why. So it helped me. To me, the biggest thing, and maybe this is the best thing to end on, I just never wanted to get to a point in my life. I was 50. I never wanted to ask what if.
Yeah.
I never wanted to get to a point in my life where I had to wonder, if I had started painting, I wonder what would have happened or what could have happened. I wanted the answer more than anything. And so it kind of haunted me and became my ultimate strategy was answer the question, what if? And at least so far, 8.5 years in, I have a pretty good answer. It's not the full answer, but I like the answer so far.
You've come a long ways in 8 years, and you still got a long ways to go. You may even be on one of Elon Musk's Mars ships and paint on Mars.
All right. Thanks for that vote of confidence.
Yeah, why not? Aim high, right? Well, Kevin, it's been a real pleasure talking. There's so much more I could talk to you about, but I deeply appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and sharing your journey. Trust the journey. I like that phrase. It's quite beautiful. So thank you so much for joining me on The Artful Painter today.
Thank you. I'm honored. And again, this is one of the extraordinary things that has happened to me and for me, is you inviting me to do this. So thank you. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. I want to thank Kevin Kehoe for being in this edition of The Artful Painter. I also want to thank Kent Mullinex of the Booth Museum for introducing me to Kevin. If you're ever in Cartersville, Georgia, please visit the Booth Museum. It's one of the finest collections of Western art that you will find east of the Mississippi. Also, you'll see Kevin Kehoe's beautiful painting, Western Book Club. You'll really enjoy taking a look at that among the many other hundreds and hundreds of paintings that are on exhibit, as well as sculpture at the Booth Museum. I'm pleased to announce that I'm a sponsor of Vision X Live, and I'll be hosting several of the live events in that conference, July 16th through the 18th of 2021. Vision X Live has been put together by Brian Mark Taylor. You know him as a painter, Strata Easel, Sentient Academy, and it's also been put together by Keith Wong of Sentient Academy, and he himself is also a great painter. Yesterday, we met together with a special program with all it was kind of like a pre-conference show with all those that are presenting at the show and some who are attending the show. It was a really nice pre-show meeting. And there I was impressed by what Brian and Keith had to say, as well as some of the other artists that were present, about what this conference is about. Brian emphasized to us that this event is not just about technique and craft. Rather, it's about being an artist. Think of Vision X as TED Talks for artists. The goal is to share big ideas that help artists move forward in their careers. It's about being an artist. That's a subject that's really near and dear to my heart. So I really appreciate Brian stressing that as a goal for Vision X Live. Now, there'll be several live sessions. There's no way you can attend all of them during that 3-day period, but you can choose your favorites. Many will be available for replay throughout the year, so it's well worth it to attend. Some of the artists that will be featured are artists like Michelle Donaway, David Dibble, Quang Ho, Scott Christensen, and so many more. Now, there's one session, for example, I'm looking forward to, and that is a panel discussion called Plein Air Painters of America, Past, Present, and Future. And that panel will include artists Jill Carver, Skip Whitcomb, and Mitch Baird. Now, all of them have been interviewed on The Artful Painter, so be sure to check out their episodes. I really look forward to hearing what they have to say. That is an organization which I've benefited from greatly from their education programs. So if you'd like to find out more information about Vision X Live and register to participate, visit visionxlive.com. There's a link in the show notes. I now want to take a moment to acknowledge the associate producers of The Artful Painter. These are people who have supported The Artful Painter with their generous donations. I want to acknowledge 2 recurring contributors who have given additional support to The Artful Painter. This includes Britt Kember and Alan Bloom. So very grateful to both of them. I enjoy getting emails from them and their support for this show. If you want to see a complete list of all those who have become what I call affectionately associate producers of The Artful Painter, you can go to theartfulpainter.com/donate. And there, too, you'll see that many of the contributors have provided their website or their social media accounts, so you can check out their artwork there. It's something I like to do for them since they have been so helpful to me. But again, thank you to all you contributors to The Artful Painter. I very much appreciate it. It does make a huge difference in keeping this show going. Well, that brings us to the end of this edition of The Artful Painter. May your tubes be full of beautiful and light, fast colors and your brush strokes confident. I'll see you all in the next edition of The Artful Painter.
Picture on the TV.